The Targaryen family timeline is spread across 3 centuries. Their long lineage, combined with their obsession with repeating ancestral names to name everyone Aegon, makes it one of the most complicated family trees in the history of Westeros, and that's saying something. So, from the moment the Targaryens escaped the fall of Valyria to the tragic rise and fall of Daenerys Targaryen, here is the complete timeline of the House Targaryen family tree. Dragon Lords of Valyria. The Targaryens ruled the 7 kingdoms with fire, blood, and dragons. But their story isn't just about power, it's about prophecy, family betrayal, civil war, and a dynasty that slowly destroyed itself from the inside. And like most stories about the Targaryens, it all began with a prophecy. You see, long before Westeros even heard the name Targaryen, the family lived in the powerful civilization of Valyria in Essos. They were one of the 40 Dragon Lord families who ruled Valyria with their dragons and influence. The Targaryen sigil was a red 3-headed dragon, breathing red flames on black, and their house words were fire and blood. And even though House Targaryen was one of the elite noble houses in the Valyrian freehold, they were not among the most powerful dragon lords in the realm. This is why, when Lord Aenar Targaryen's daughter, Daenerys the Dreamer, had a vision of cataclysm coming over Valyria, none of the Dragon Lords took her seriously at all. But Aenar Targaryen trusted his daughter and her vision and immediately packed his belongings and left Valyria with his family and 5 whole dragons, including Balerion. He moved to Dragonstone, island at the entrance of Blackwater Bay, and the westernmost outpost of Valyrian influence. New Targaryen outpost, Dragonstone. The Targaryens built a new life at Dragonstone, but the Dragon Lords back in the Valyrian freehold ridiculed Lord Aenar for his decision to leave everything behind just for some prophetic dream that was likely the misimaginings of a scared child having night terrors. However, 12 years later, Daenerys Targaryen's terrifying prophecy came true. Valyria was wiped out in a cataclysm known as the Doom of Valyria. Volcanoes erupted, the land split apart, and the greatest empire in the world vanished, almost overnight. Valar Morghulis was how they said it in Valyria of old. All men must die, and the doom came and proved it true. Almost every Dragon Lord family died that day in the Valyrian freehold, except the Targaryens, and their survival eventually reshaped the entire continent of Westeros.
And just as Daenerys foresaw the end of Valyria, Aegon foresaw the end of the world of men.
In the century following the Doom of Valyria, 4 out of 5 dragons of House Targaryen died. Balerion survived and was later joined by Vhagar and Meraxes, 2 dragons that hatched from eggs on Dragonstone. Meanwhile, Essos was gripped by violent power struggles, since dozens of Valyrian colonies were now leaderless and vulnerable after the sudden death of all the Dragon Lords. Volantis, which was one of the oldest and most powerful Valyrian colonies, believed it had the right to inherit Valyria's remaining lands. The old blood families of Valyria saw themselves as the natural successors to the freehold and began seizing nearby Valyrian colonies in the hopes of rebuilding the Valyrian Empire. However, cities like Myr, Lys, Tyrosh, Pentos, and Norvos that had just finally earned their freedom from Dragon Lords did not want to fall under the tyranny of an all-new empire, so they turned towards Aegon I Targaryen, the only Dragon Lord with dragons, for help. Aegon I agreed to form an alliance with the Free Cities, and burned the Volantene fleet down with Balerion. That marked the end of the Century of Blood, and crushed the Valyrian conquest forever. And from here, the long succession of the Targaryens starts with Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon the Conqueror. Aegon I Targaryen was never interested in the politics of Essos. His eyes were set on Westeros, a vast region comprising 7 kingdoms across the Narrow Sea. So around 2 BC, he began his invasion with his 2 sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya. Aegon didn't have a large army, but he had something no one else in Westeros possessed: dragons. And even centuries later, Aegon once stood here as I do, looking down on this table. Do you think we would name him Aegon the Conqueror today if he had not had dragons? Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya were all dragon riders, and their dragons, Balerion, Meraxes, and Vhagar, gave them a massive advantage over all the armies in Westeros. At the time, the continent wasn't united. Instead, it was divided into several powerful kingdoms, each ruled by its own royal house. One of the first rulers to challenge Aegon was the Harrenhal, the king of the Iron Islands and the Riverlands combined. Harren believed his massive fortress, Harrenhal, was completely unbreachable, and it might have been if Aegon didn't have dragons. So, when Harren refused to surrender, Aegon flew above the castle on Balerion the Black Dread and unleashed dragonfire. The stone towers of Harrenhal literally melted, and Harrenhal, alongside his entire line, burned inside the fortress they had taken to be impregnable. Aegon wasn't lying when he warned Harrenhal,
"When the sun sets, your line shall end."
With House Horror destroyed, Aegon rewarded Edmund Tully for supporting the invasion and granted the Riverlands to House Tully. Meanwhile, the next major battle erupted in the Stormlands, where the Storm King, Argilac Durrandon, marched out to fight the Targaryens in a battle later remembered as the Last Storm. The fighting was brutal, and Argilac was eventually defeated and killed, and with him, his ancient royal house, House Durrandon, came to an end. And in its place, Aegon installed a brand new ruling family called House Baratheon, led by Orys Baratheon, who was widely believed to be Aegon's own half-brother. And while Aegon the Conqueror was busy with battles in the Riverlands and Stormlands, his sister wife Visenya Targaryen flew north and forced the lords of Cracklaw Point to submit to Targaryen rule. But not every kingdom was willing to surrender, because when Rhaenys Targaryen flew south to bring Dorne into the new Targaryen realm, the Dornish refused to bend the knee, and that decision would lead to a much longer conflict that continued even after the main conquest of Westeros had ended. Conquering the Reach in the Westerlands wasn't easy either. The powerful Mern Gardener IX, King of the Reach, joined forces with Loren Lannister I, the King of the Rock, and together they gathered one of the largest armies Westeros had ever seen. But numbers didn't matter where dragons were concerned, because when Aegon flew into the battlefield with 3 dragons, all those men stood no chance at all. The entire battlefield was consumed by fire, with thousands of soldiers burned to ashes. House Gardener, the ancient kings of the Reach, were completely wiped out. After the battle, Aegon elevated House Tyrell, the former stewards of Highgarden, and made them the new rulers of the Reach. Learning from House Gardener's mistakes, King Loren Lannister surrendered to Aegon without a fight, making the Westerlands part of the Targaryen Empire. With the West and South largely defeated, the remaining kingdoms had to decide whether they wanted to fight dragons or stay alive. Torrhen Stark, the Warden of the North, marched south with his army to face Aegon, but when he saw the dragons, he immediately chose diplomacy instead of destruction. He bent the knee and became known forever as the King Who Knelt. Ronal Arryn of the Vale also admitted defeat. Finally, in the great city of Old Town, the High Septon officially anointed Aegon as king. And just like that, the 7 kingdoms became united under a single ruler for the first time in history. After the conquest was complete, Aegon Targaryen I let the Iron Islands decide their own fate and allowed them to choose their new lord themselves. The Ironborn chose House Greyjoy, who began ruling the Iron Islands under Aegon's authority. Aegon also did something that would become one of the most iconic symbols in all of Westeros. He ordered his men to gather the swords of his defeated enemies, which were at this point in the thousands, and then used dragonfire to melt those blades and forge them together into a single throne. A king should never sit easy.
1,000 blades, taken from the hands of Aegon's fallen enemies, forged in the fiery breath of Balerion the Dread.
That throne became the legendary Iron Throne, a sharp and uncomfortable seat meant to remind every ruler who sat on it that the throne was won through a long conquest and bloodshed. The next thing Aegon did was build Aegon Fort, which was a simple wooden fortress on the spot where he first landed in Westeros. Over time, a town grew around Aegon Fort, and eventually turned and morphed into a massive city, known eventually as King's Landing. Aegon's old castle at Dragonstone remained under Targaryen rule and continued to be one of Aegon's favourite strongholds. The lands surrounding the new capital also gained a new identity. Instead of belonging to any of the old kingdoms, the territory was ruled directly by the crown and became known as the Crownlands. And that's how the age of the Targaryen dynasty began. Aegon the Conqueror brought fire and blood to Westeros. Afterwards, he gave them peace, prosperity, and justice. But Aegon's dream of uniting all the kingdoms in Westeros was incomplete, since Dorne was still out of reach. So after Aegon became king, he tried even harder to bring Dorne into the Targaryen fold, and set the First Dornish War in motion. This war was, to put it mildly, long and bloody. And Aegon lost Queen Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes at Hellholt. An assassination attempt was also made on Aegon at the same time, an event that led to the creation of the Kingsguard. This loyal group of men was given the duty of protecting the kings for years to come. The First Dornish War finally ended when the Prince of Dorne, Nimrod Martell, sent his daughter to King's Landing with a letter and the skull of Meraxes. No one knew what was written inside that letter, but Aegon agreed to end the war immediately after reading it. Aenys Targaryen I. Aegon the Conqueror had 2 sons, each born to one of his 2 sister wives. One was Prince Maegor, who was born to Queen Visenya, and the other was Prince Aenys, the son of Queen Rhaenys. When Aegon Targaryen I died in 37 AC, the Iron Throne passed to his eldest son, Aenys Targaryen I. But Aenys quickly realized that inheriting a kingdom was much easier than holding it together. Rebellion began to spread across the 7 kingdoms. Some people longed for the days before the Targaryens arrived. Others wanted revenge for the destruction caused during the conquest, and many simply refused to accept a dynasty built on incestuous Valyrian traditions. Within a short time, 4 major uprisings erupted across the realm. The first came from the Riverlands, where a bandit calling himself Harren the Red claimed to be a grandson of Harrenhal, the king who had burned inside Harrenhal during Aegon's conquest. Harren the Red seized the massive castle and murdered the lord who ruled it. Meanwhile, trouble arose in the Vale of Arryn as Jonos Arryn betrayed his own brother, Ronald Arryn, taking him and his family hostage in the Eyrie. The next kingdom to erupt was the Iron Islands themselves, where a mysterious man appeared claiming to be Lodos the Twice Drowned. A legendary priest king returned from the dead. And if that wasn't enough, the Vulture King in the south raised an enormous rebellion in Dorne, gathering nearly 30,000 followers to fight against the Targaryen king. Suddenly, the young king was beset, surrounded on all sides by enemies. Aenys was a kind-hearted man who always wanted to please others. He believed that the small folk loved him, so he couldn't understand why people were rebelling against him. The king was easily influenced, swaying this way and that, like a reed in the wind, like as not to heed whichever counselor last had his ear. But this obsession to please everyone made Aenys indecisive, a characteristic the Iron Throne could not afford at a time when 4 rebellions threatened the kingdom. Fortunately for Aenys, some of his allies moved quickly. On the Iron Islands, Goran Greyjoy killed the false Lodos and sent his head directly to the king. In the Vale, the loyal House Royce defeated Jonos Arryn's supporters, but not before Jonos threw Lord Ronald and his entire family through the moon door of the Eyrie, killing all of them. Eventually, Aenys' younger brother, Maegor Targaryen, stepped in. Maegor flew to the Vale on his father's dragon, Balerion, and executed Jonos and the remaining rebels. Down in the south, the massive Dornish rebellion also collapsed after the Vulture King made a fatal mistake of splitting his army into smaller forces. This allowed several powerful lords of the Stormlands, including Orys Baratheon, Lord Dondarrion, Lady Karen, and Samwell Tarly, to hunt him down during a campaign known as the Vulture Hunt. Finally, the last rebel, Harren the Red, was hunted down by the King's Hand, Alan Stokeworth. Alan managed to corner the outlaw, but the fight ended in tragedy since Harren killed the Hand of the King right before he himself was killed. One by one, all 4 rebellions ended in King Aenys' favor, but his biggest problem wasn't rebellious lords, it was the faith of the 7. You see, the Targaryens followed the faith, but they still practiced ancient Valyrian customs, which critically included incestuous marriage and sometimes polygamy. The Targaryen practices were sins for the faith, and even though the High Septon had quietly tolerated Aegon's marriage with his sisters, he never really approved it.
The Father judges us all, sons of high lords, sons of fishermen. If you break his laws, you will be punished.
And the tension between the faith and the crown reached a breaking point when Maegor, who had been married for 16 years to Cerys Hightower without producing an heir, took a second wife, Alice Harroway. No wonder the High Lords questioned King Aenys' powers. How can he rule the 7 kingdoms when he cannot rule his own brother? The faith was also enraged, and King Aenys was forced to give his brother a choice to abandon his new wife or go into exile. Maegor chose exile and sailed away to Pentos, but the situation only grew worse when King Aenys married his eldest daughter, Rhaena Targaryen, to his own son and heir, Aegon Targaryen II. The marriage sparked a massive religious rebellion known as the Faith Militant Uprising, and over time, the pressure became unbearable for Aenys, so he fled to Dragonstone, where he later fell ill and died. Maegor the Cruel. King Aenys I had 6 children with his wife, Queen Alyssa Velaryon, Princess Rhaena, Prince Aegon, Prince Viserys, Prince Jaehaerys, Prince Alysanne, and Princess Vaelor. After Aenys' death, the throne should have passed on to his eldest son, Prince Aegon II, but the Dowager Queen, Visenya Targaryen, had other plans. A true king, blood of Aegon the Conqueror, who was my brother, my husband, and my love. If any man questions my son's right to the Iron Throne, let him prove his claim with his body. She immediately summoned her son, Maegor, back from exile, and supported his claim to the throne. Maegor, who was much older and stronger than Prince Aegon II, seized King's Landing and took the crown by force. The Iron Throne will go to the man who has the strength to seize it. But Aegon II didn't give up without a fight. He met his uncle Maegor and his dragon Balerion in the sky. Unfortunately, Aegon's dragon, Quicksilver, was no match for the monstrous Balerion. Both dragon and rider died in the battle. Queen Alyssa was hiding at Dragonstone with her 2 youngest children, Jaehaerys and Alysanne, when Aegon II was killed while her second son, Prince Viserys, was still imprisoned in King's Landing. With no one to challenge his claim, Maegor sat on the Iron Throne and began his reign of terror, one that earned him the nickname Maegor the Cruel. Maegor built the Red Keep in King's Landing, but once the construction was finished, the king ordered the execution of every builder, mason, and laborer involved in the project. He wanted to make sure that no one knew the secrets of the castle. And despite multiple marriages, including to a group of wives later known as the Black Brides, Maegor still failed to produce an heir. When Maegor's mother, Visenya, died, Queen Alyssa, who was still hiding at Dragonstone, slipped away with her 2 kids and took refuge at Storm's End. When King Maegor found out, he turned his anger towards her second son, Prince Viserys, who was tortured for 9 days and eventually killed. Maegor's cruelty was becoming intolerable, and powerful lords and the common folk began gathering around Aenys' only surviving son, Jaehaerys I Targaryen. What demon possessed him, none could say. Even today, some give thanks that his tyranny was a short one, for who knows how many noble houses might have vanished forever, simply to sate his desire. With time, Maegor became isolated, and his allies slowly abandoned him. And then suddenly, something strange happened inside the Red Keep. Maegor was found dead on the Iron Throne, with his wrists slashed and a spike through the neck. Was he silently killed by one of his enemies? Or did he kill himself? No one really knows, and Maegor's death remains one of Westeros' greatest mysteries. And with Maegor gone, the crown finally passed to Jaehaerys I, who would go on to become one of the greatest Targaryen rulers in history. Jaehaerys Targaryen I, the Wise. Jaehaerys I was the son of Prince Aenys Targaryen and the rider of the dragon Vermithor. When Maegor mysteriously died in the throne room, Jaehaerys was only 14 years old. But despite his tender age, Jaehaerys I ruled the kingdom with wisdom and a firm hand. His reign lasted for 55 years. He made peace with the faith. He also enforced the doctrine of exceptionalism, so the faith would accept House Targaryen's incestuous marriages. According to this doctrine, the Targaryens rode dragons and were therefore closer to gods than men. So, the rules that applied to the average Westerosian did not apply to the Targaryens. Also, they came from Valyria, where sibling marriage was a tradition, so the faith didn't have the right to stop them, obviously. He worked on the books of law and created a strong infrastructure across the 7 kingdoms. Aegon the Dragon and his sisters conquered the 7 kingdoms, 6 of them at least. But it was Jaehaerys the Conciliator who truly made them one. The common folk loved Jaehaerys I, because he was fair and actually cared about his people. King Jaehaerys was married to his sister, Queen Alysanne, and the two had a total of 13 children together. Unfortunately, only a few of his children outlived him, and when his only heir, Prince Aemon, died before succession, Jaehaerys did something that had never happened before. He called the Great Council to decide on the more worthy candidate for the throne. The choice was between Prince Rhaenys, Prince Aemon's daughter, and Viserys I, Prince Baelon's nephew. The council eventually selected Viserys as Jaehaerys' heir. Westeros mourned, and it was claimed that even in dawn, men wept and women tore their garments in lament for a king who had been so just and good. Viserys Targaryen I, the young king. Viserys I was a peaceful man who inherited Jaehaerys' wisdom. He was also the last man to ride Balerion, and when that dragon died, Viserys did not bond with any other dragon. Although there was no trouble in the Seven Kingdoms during his reign, the real conflict was brewing inside the Red Keep. Viserys Targaryen I had a generous, amiable nature, and was well loved by his lords and small folk alike. You see, Viserys I was married to Aemma Arryn for years, and together they had only one surviving child, which was his daughter, Rhaenyra Targaryen. But when the queen died in childbirth, along with the newborn prince, Baelon, the king was left without a male heir. That's when Viserys made a bold and controversial decision. He officially named Princess Rhaenyra as his successor, and forced the great lords of the realm to swear loyalty to her as the future ruler of Westeros. This was the first time a woman was considered worthy of the throne, and it seemed like the question of succession had been settled.
I, Corlys Velaryon, Lord of the Tides and Master of Driftmark, promise to be faithful to King Viserys and his named heir, the Princess Rhaenyra.
However, things changed when the king remarried Alicent Hightower, and soon the royal family began to grow again. Alicent gave the king 3 sons, Aegon Targaryen II, Aemon Targaryen, and Daeron Targaryen, and also a daughter, Helaena Targaryen. Now the kingdom had multiple male heirs, but Viserys refused to change his decision and declared that no matter how many sons he had, Rhaenyra would still inherit the Iron Throne. This decision slowly divided the royal court. The people who supported Rhaenyra became known as the Blacks, while supporters of Queen Alicent and her children became known as the Greens. And the rivalry only grew worse as the next generation grew up. Rhaenyra married Laenor Velaryon and had 3 sons, Jaehaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey Velaryon. But there were rumors that these boys were actually fathered by Harwin Strong, not Laenor.
Do keep trying, Selena. Sooner or later you may get one who looks like you.
This enraged Alicent's sons, because they now believed the Iron Throne was being stolen by children they considered illegitimate. Meanwhile, another powerful figure returned to Rhaenyra's side, her uncle, Daemon Targaryen. Both Daemon and Rhaenyra had previously been married into House Velaryon, but when their spouses died in 120 AC, the two married one another, and together they had 3 more children, Aegon III, Viserys II, and a stillborn daughter named Visenya. At the same time, King Viserys arranged a marriage between his own children from Alicent's line. Prince Aegon married his sister Helaena, and together they had 3 children, Jaehaerys, Jaehaera, and Maelor. And by the end of Viserys' reign, the royal family had split into 2 powerful factions, both convinced that they had the right to claim the throne. So when the king finally died, the fragile peace collapsed almost immediately. He had ruled for 26 years, reigning over the most prosperous era in the history of the Seven Kingdoms, but seeding within it the disastrous decline of his house and the death of the last dragons. The Dance of the Dragons. While Rhaenyra was on Dragonstone, unaware that her father had died, Queen Alicent and her allies moved quickly in King's Landing. With the support of the Kingsguard commander Criston Cole, they crowned Alicent's son as King Aegon II, directly defying Viserys' final wishes. The first Viserys intended his daughter Rhaenyra to follow him. Do you deny it? But as the king lay dying, the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard decided that it should be otherwise.
The High Septon crowned Aegon in the Dragon Pit. I witnessed it myself just before I fled on Meleys.
When Rhaenyra finally found out, she refused to accept King Aegon and instead declared war. The conflict that followed would become one of the most devastating civil wars in Westerosi history. It was known as the Dance of the Dragons. For the next 2 years, dragons fought dragons as the Targaryen family tore itself asunder. Cities burned and armies were destroyed, and the dragons who were once the greatest power in the world began to die. But the war's most tragic moment came when Rhaenyra returned to Dragonstone, only to find that her half-brother Aegon II had secretly taken the castle. I offered her an honorable peace, and the whore spat in my face. What happens now is on her own head. Aegon II unleashed his dragon, Sunfire, onto Rhaenyra, and even though the dragon was badly wounded and unable to fly, it was strong enough to blast Rhaenyra with dragonfire and eat her alive. And if that wasn't bad enough, Aegon II forced Rhaenyra's youngest son, Aegon III, to watch the horrible scene unfold. She was the daughter to one king, a mother to two more, yet she died a traitor's death for trying to usurp her brother's crown. But the fighting didn't stop even then. The Targaryens fought amongst themselves for months afterwards, until Aegon II finally agreed to name Rhaenyra's surviving son, Aegon the Younger, as his heir, and marry his daughter Jaehaerys to him. But the conflict ended in a final act of betrayal, as Aegon II was poisoned by his own counselors, leaving the throne for Rhaenyra's son, Aegon the Younger, who became Aegon Targaryen III at just 11 years old. The war finally came to an end, but at terrible cost, as almost all the Targaryen dragons had died, and when the last dragon finally died in 153 AC, the dynasty lost the very creatures that had once made them unstoppable. Desperate to restore their power, Aegon's brother and Hand of the King, Viserys, convinced him to bring 9 mages from Essos to try to hatch a clutch of dragon eggs using magic, but that attempt failed, marking the end of the era of dragons. Daeron Targaryen I, the Young Dragon. Aegon III, known as Aegon the Dragonbane, had 5 children with his second wife, Queen Daenerys Velaryon. So after King Aegon III died of illness, the throne passed on to his eldest son, Daeron Targaryen I, who was only 14 years old. Normally, when a king was too young, a regent would step in to rule the realm. But in Daeron's case, his uncle, Viserys, allowed the young boy to take full control, while he continued serving as Hand of the King. Now, Daeron was obsessed with bringing Dawn into the Targaryen realm, and even during Aegon I's conquest, it had refused to bend the knee. But Daeron believed he could succeed where his ancestors had failed, and somehow, he actually did it. King Daeron wrote with an elegant simplicity, and his history is rich with blood, battle, and bravery. Within a single year, Daeron launched a full-scale invasion and managed to bring Dawn under Targaryen control. In Sunspear, the Dornish leadership formally submitted in an event remembered as the Submission of Sunspear. With a momentous victory, Daeron returned to King's Landing, leaving trusted lords behind to maintain control in Dawn. And for a moment, it looked like he had truly completed the Conqueror's conquest, but that victory didn't last. The small folk in Dawn never accepted the Targaryen rule and rebelled against the crown. No matter how many strongholds the crown secured, resistance kept rising again and again until everything collapsed. And when one of Daeron's key supporters was assassinated, the entire region erupted in open revolt. Within just 2 weeks, the Dornish drove the Targaryens out, marking the end of the conquest. A conquest that lasted a summer. Your boy king lost 10,000 men taking the place, and another 50 trying to hold it. Someone should have told him that war isn't a game. Dawn was free again, but Daeron refused to accept defeat and returned to reclaim it. And when the Dornish offered peace talks, Daeron was more than happy to join. Unfortunately, the meeting was really just a trap, and the Dornish attacked the king and his men under the protection of a peace banner. The king was killed alongside several of his Kingsguard, marking the end of Daeron I's 4-year-long reign. Baelor the Blessed. With no wife and no heirs, the throne passed to his younger brother, Baelor Targaryen I. Now, Baelor was very different from his impulsive brother. Where Daeron was ambitious and war-driven, Baelor was deeply religious. He was a rare spirit, pure and brave and innocent, untouched by the evils of the world. In fact, his first major decision shocked the entire realm, because instead of executing the Dornish hostages as punishment, Baelor chose to free them. And he didn't just send them back, he personally walked barefoot all the way from King's Landing to Dawn, just to escort them home. There he negotiated peace directly with the Dornish rulers, and arranged a marriage alliance between the two regions. It was a completely different approach, and it worked. Baelor was married to his sister, Princess Daena, but he never had any children with her. Eventually he ended his marriage and locked all his sisters in a tower to protect their purity, and vowed never to have children. Baelor never had a queen. He was holy. He also ordered the construction of a massive sept in King's Landing, and began fasting more and more frequently, until eventually it went too far. One time he fasted for 40 days, at the end of which he collapsed and died. Since Baelor the Blessed didn't have any heirs, the throne passed on to the next male in line, which was his uncle, Viserys Targaryen II. Viserys II was Rhaenyra and Daemon Targaryen's son, who had quietly served as the hand of the king for Aegon III, Daeron I, and Baelor I. He was probably the most experienced king Westeros had seen in a few decades, but his rule only lasted for a year as he died from a sudden illness. However, some believe that he was poisoned by his own son, Aegon Targaryen IV, in his desperation to become king quickly. Even though Viserys II was king for a very short time, he made several improvements, like setting up a new royal mint, working on the laws created by Jaehaerys, opening trade routes across the Narrow Sea. Viserys might only have reigned a year, but he ruled for 15, while Daeron warred and Baelor prayed. And that's what makes his story kind of tragic, because even with such a short reign, it was clear he had the potential to be another Jaehaerys the Wise. He could have been a great king who could have brought real stability to the realm, only he'd had more time. Aegon the Unworthy. King Viserys II was married to Lara Rhaegar of Lys. Together they had 3 children, Prince Aegon, Prince Aemon, and Princess Daenerys. After Viserys' death, his eldest son, Aegon IV, sat on the Iron Throne. Aegon was not called the Unworthy without cause. Aegon's reign became known for corruption, excess, and chaos. He ruled however he pleased, rewarding and punishing noble houses on a whim, often changing sides whenever it suited him. But his personal life was even worse, somehow. You see, Aegon IV was married to his sister, Daenerys Targaryen, but the two couldn't have been more different. Daenerys was gentle and devout, while Aegon was the complete opposite. When their son, Daeron Targaryen II, was born, the Grand Maester warned Aegon that another pregnancy could kill Daenerys, but Aegon ignored it and continued to force more and more pregnancies on her. And while most of those children didn't survive, one daughter did, who was named Daenerys Targaryen. Daenerys died in childbirth. Aegon became openly promiscuous, fathering countless bastard children. That king, Aegon, he had any woman he wanted, whether they were married or not. Now, bastard kids were nothing new for kings, but Aegon took it a step further, well, several steps further, by openly acknowledging many of them, especially those born to his favourite mistresses. One of them was Daemon Blackfyre, the bastard Aegon IV had with Queen Daena, Baelor the Blessed's wife. Then there was Aegor Rivers, born to Barbara Bracken. The boy earned the title Bittersteel and fled to Essos to create the Golden Company. Another important bastard was Brynda Rivers, later known as Bloodraven. He was an albino sorcerer and master of whisperers who remained loyal to the crown and eventually became the Three-Eyed Raven. Shaera Seastar was also a bastard daughter of Aegon IV and his 9th mistress, Serene of Lys. She was considered the most beautiful woman in Westeros and became the reason of a lifelong rivalry between Bloodraven and Bittersteel, who both wanted to marry her. Fire and blood were the words of House Targaryen, but Dunk had once heard Sir Arlen say that Aegon's should have been, "Wash her and bring her to my bed." All hell broke loose when Aegon publicly recognized Daemon as his son and gave him the Valyrian steel sword Blackfyre. Now, this wasn't just any weapon, it was the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and was passed down from ruler to ruler. So when Aegon handed it to his bastard son, people started to wonder if the king wanted Daemon to succeed him. This was the moment the first seeds of rebellion were planted, and while all of this was happening, Aegon's relationship with his true-born heir, Prince Daeron, only got worse. As Daeron grew older, he began to challenge his father more openly, especially when Aegon made reckless decisions, like trying to invade Dorne using wooden dragons. Some say the king himself spread rumors about his son's illegitimacy, so he wouldn't inherit the throne, out of spite and pettiness. But Aegon's most controversial act was legitimizing all his bastard children on his deathbed. This turned dozens of illegitimate sons into potential rivals for the throne and pushed the realm into years of conflicts and wars. Daeron the Good. When Aegon died, his true-born son, Daeron II Targaryen, finally became king. And unlike his father, Daeron ruled with patience and diplomacy. One of his biggest goals was to bring Dorne fully into the realm, a dream that many Targaryen rulers had tried to achieve. Instead of waging war on Dorne, Daeron arranged his sister Daenerys' marriage with Maron Martell, the Prince of Dorne. The whole realm knew that the girl loved Daeron's bastard brother, Daemon Blackfyre, and was loved by him in turn. But the king was wise enough to see that the good of thousands must come before the desires of two, even if those two were dear to him. and for the first time in history, Dorne officially joined the Seven Kingdoms. But not everyone was happy about it. Many lords resented the growing influence of the Dornish at court. They didn't trust them, and they didn't like the idea of former enemies gaining power. Even Daeron's own heir, Prince Baelor, looked more Dornish than traditionally Valyrian, which only made things worse in the eyes of those who longed for the old days. So, these lords began to look at Daemon Blackfyre as an alternative. A warrior with the classic silver gold hair and deep purple eyes. Daemon was a powerful leader and looked more like a king than Daeron. Daeron was spindly and round of shoulder, with a little belly that wobbled when he walked. Daemon stood straight and proud, and his stomach was flat and hard as an oaken shield, and he could fight. Slowly, the realm was divided into two factions, one that supported King Daeron, and the other that believed Daemon was the true king. And it wasn't long until the first Blackfyre Rebellion broke out. Daemon Blackfyre claimed the throne for himself, and many powerful lords supported him with their men. The war lasted nearly a year and came to a brutal end at the Battle of the Red Grass Field, where Daemon was killed alongside his two eldest sons. The rebellion was crushed, but it didn't truly end there because one of Daemon's strongest supporters, Aegor Rivers, escaped across the Narrow Sea with the surviving members of House Blackfyre and the Sword Blackfyre itself. So even though the rebellion had been defeated, the threat of the Blackfyres was far from over and would linger for a long time to come. King Daeron II had 4 sons with Queen Miriah Martell, Baelor Breakspear, Aerys I, Rhaegal, and Maekar I. Most of Daeron II's reign was peaceful until his oldest son and heir, Prince Baelor, died at a tourney in Ashford Meadow, defending a hedge knight named Duncan the Tall. And just like that, the realm was thrown into uncertainty once again. But the situation got worse when a deadly plague known as the Great Spring Sickness spread across the realm. Thousands of people died, and among them was the royal family itself. King Daeron II died, along with Prince Baelor's sons and heirs to the throne, Valar and Meraxes. And in a matter of months, the line of succession was completely shattered. Aerys Targaryen I. With Prince Baelor and his sons dead, the throne finally passed to Aerys Targaryen I, Daeron's second son. But his reign was shadowed by doom from the beginning. First, with the Great Sickness, then a terrible drought that drained the land physically and economically. The people were poor, hungry and restless, and on top of all of that, Aerys didn't have an heir from his marriage to Aelinor Penrose. So he named different heirs, but tragedy continued to strike his family, starting with his brother Rhaegal, then Rhaegal's son Aelor. One by one, all of Aerys' heirs died until the line fell to Aerys' youngest brother, Maekar Targaryen I. When Maekar I inherited the throne from Aerys, the realm was greatly weakened from within. Plague, drought, crime, and 2 Blackfyre rebellions had plunged the Seven Kingdoms into a permanent state of uncertainty and depression.
Some men will say I meant to kill my brother. The gods know it is a lie, but I will hear the whispers to the day I die.
Maekar ruled for over a decade, bringing some strength back to the throne. But even his reign ended in chaos, since King Maekar died while leading an attack during the Peak Uprising. And once again, the question of who would sit on the Iron Throne returned because Maekar's heirs were complicated. Maekar was married to Deanna Dane and had 6 children with her: Daeron, Aerion, Aemon, Aegon, Rhae, and Daela. Maekar's eldest son was already dead, leaving behind only a daughter. His second son, Aerion, had died after drinking wildfire, believing it would turn him into a dragon. His third son, Maester Aemon, had taken vows as a maester, giving up any claims to the throne. And his youngest son, Aegon, also known as Egg, had spent his childhood away from castles, squiring for Duncan the Tall. This is why many lords didn't take Aegon seriously. So to settle the matter, Brynda Rivers, who served as Hand of the King for Maekar, called a great council, and one by one, all possible heirs were considered and quietly set aside. The crown was first offered to Maester Aemon, but when he refused, the throne passed on to the least expected choice of all, Aegon the Unlikely, the 4th son of a 4th son, a boy no one thought would ever be king. Aegon Targaryen V. When Aegon Targaryen V finally took the Iron Throne, It should have been the start of a hopeful new chapter, but instead his reign began under a cloud of tension and difficult choices. One of his very first challenges came from a man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in the realm, Brynda Rivers. Although Rivers had served loyally as hand under previous kings, he crossed a line that Aegon simply could not ignore. He had offered safe passage to Aenys Blackfyre, a potential claimant, promising him protection so he could present his case at the Great Council. However, when Aenys arrived in King's Landing, Rivers betrayed that promise, arresting and executing him instead. Because of that, Aegon was left with no real choice but to act, and so he had Brynden Rivers arrested and sent to the Wall, where he joined the Night's Watch. At the same time, Aegon's own brother, Maester Aemon, chose to go with Brynden so no one could ever use his claim to challenge the king.
My father was Maekar, the first of his name. My brother Aegon reigned after him when I had refused the throne.
And while Aegon was trying to stabilize the realm politically, new threats were beginning to rise as another Blackfyre pretender, Daemon III Blackfyre, crossed the Narrow Sea, hoping to reclaim the throne. But the rebellion never gained real momentum, and ultimately came to an end when Daemon III was slain by none other than Duncan the Tall, the same Hedge Knight who had once travelled the realm with Aegon himself. But even with that victory, Aegon's troubles were far from over, because the realm was pushed into a brutal, years-long winter that deeply affected the north. And when Aegon tried to send more food and support to those in need, the powerful lords in Westeros viewed him as weak. And that tension only grew worse as Aegon began pushing reforms designed to limit the power of the same lords while giving more rights and protections to the small folk. Although his intentions were good, many powerful houses saw this as a direct threat to their authority and began defying him openly. A bloody-handed tyrant intent on depriving us of our God-given rights and liberties. Aegon and his wife, Betha Blackwood, had 5 children: Duncan, Jaehaerys, Shira, Daeron, and Rhaelle. Trouble began when Aegon's eldest son, Duncan Targaryen, added fuel to the fire by leaving Lionel Baratheon's daughter to marry Jenny of Oldstones. This enraged Lionel, and he declared himself King of the Stormlands, which could have turned into a major war. But Duncan the Tall once again stepped in, faced Lionel in trial by combat, and defeated him. Unfortunately, all of Aegon's children wanted to follow their own paths. His son Jaehaerys II Targaryen and daughter Shaira Targaryen secretly married each other, ignoring their arranged matches, while his other son, Daeron, simply refused to marry at all. And because that unlikely monarch had followed his heart when he chose his queen, he allowed his sons to have their way, making bitter enemies where he might have made fast friends. As a result, nearly every political alliance Aegon had tried to build through his children began to unravel, and over time, he became frustrated with the limitations of his own control over the Great Lords. And that's when he began dreaming of bringing dragons back into the world. That dream soon turned into an obsession, which ended with Aegon gathering people closest to him at the castle of Summerhall and attempting to hatch dragon eggs with fire and magic. Someday the dragons will return. My brother Daeron's dreamed of it, and King Aerys read it in a prophecy. Maybe it will be my egg that hatches. That would be splendid. What exactly happened that night is still a mystery, because the people who survived refused to speak of it. But everyone saw a great fire consume Summerhall, and the king was killed, along with his son Duncan, the commander of the Kingsguard Duncan the Tall, among many, many others. Jaehaerys Targaryen II. After the tragic fire at Summerhall, the crown passed to Aegon V's second son, Jaehaerys Targaryen II. But right after getting the throne, he had to deal with the Band of Nine, which was a group of pirates, mercenaries and warlords who had joined forces in the disputed lands. These Ninepenny Kings were led by Maelys I, the last survivor of the Blackfyre claim, and they all wanted 9 kingdoms of their own. When the men reached the Stepstones, Jaehaerys sent a royal army to meet them in battle, and what followed was a long and difficult campaign that lasted for a whole year. But in the end, it all came down to a single moment on the battlefield, when a young knight, Barristan Selmy, faced Maelys Blackfyre in combat and killed him. With Maelys' death, the male line of the Blackfyres, after generations of rebellion, finally came to an end. And without their strongest leader, the Band of Nine quickly fell apart. And just like that, a threat that had haunted the Targaryens for decades was finally no more. Jaehaerys had 2 children with his sister wife, Jaehaerys II and Rhaela Targaryen. And since a woods witch had prophesied that the prince was promised would be born from their line, King Jaehaerys had forced his children to marry each other. So when King Jaehaerys died just 3 years after taking the throne, the crown passed to his only son, Aerys II, a king whose rule would change everything. Mad King Aerys. When Aerys Targaryen II first took the Iron Throne, his reign actually began with a promise of a stronger era for the Targaryens. Aerys had big ideas, and he quickly replaced his father's older advisors with younger men. And most importantly, he appointed his childhood friend, 20-year-old Tywin Lannister, as his Hand of the King. King Jaehaerys once told me that madness and greatness were 2 sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, he said, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. At first, this seemed like the perfect partnership. Tywin was highly capable and handled much of the actual ruling, while Aerys focused on grand plans for the realm. But the problem was that Aerys never followed through on his ideas. Instead, he was constantly jumping from one plan to another, while Tywin quietly kept the kingdom stable in the background. Over time, that balance began to shift, and Aerys felt jealous of Tywin's competence and the respect he commanded. People at his court began whispering that Tywin was the true power behind the throne, and this made Aerys feel insecure, a feeling that only grew when several of his children died young. King Aerys was married to his sister wife, Rhaela, and together they had 8 children. 5 of them, Shaena, Daeron, Aegon, Jaehaerys, and an unnamed child, died in their first year. The only children who survived and became adults were Prince Rhaegar, Prince Viserys, and Princess Daenerys. The people closest to Aerys II could feel that the king was slowly becoming mentally unstable, especially when he rejected Tywin's offer to marry his daughter Cersei to Aerys' son, Rhaegar Targaryen. He said, "You are my most able servant, Tywin, but a man does not marry his heir to his servant's daughter." Instead of strengthening their political bond, Aerys made it all too clear that he would never marry his son to the daughter of someone he saw as beneath him, and his words deeply humiliated Tywin. From that point on, Aerys' paranoia only grew stronger, and his need to prove his own authority led him to increasingly reckless decisions. One of them was traveling to Duskendale with a small group of men to negotiate the crown's terms. Instead of striking a deal, King Aerys was captured and imprisoned for 6 whole months. He was beaten, abused, and stripped of his royal privileges. That broke something inside the king. So when Tywin Lannister eventually rescued him and brought him back to King's Landing, King Aerys was a different man. After that incident, his paranoia turned into full-blown madness, and he began to distrust everyone around him, including his own son, Rhaegar. The king even refused to leave the Red Keep for years. During this time, King Aerys appointed Jaime Lannister to the Kingsguard to spite Tywin, taking away his only heir. He'll win no glory here. He's mine now, not Tywin's. He'll serve as I see fit. I am the king. I rule, and he'll obey. This led to Tywin resigning his hand and leaving the capital entirely. But things truly got out of hand when Rhaegar Targaryen publicly crowned Lyanna Stark as his queen, despite being married to Elia Martell. Tensions between the Targaryens and Starks were already sky high, when suddenly both Rhaegar and Lyanna disappeared. And when Brandon Stark, Lyanna's brother, rode to King's Landing to demand justice, Aerys had him arrested and summoned their father, Rickard Stark, for the trial. But when Rickard showed up, King Aerys captured him too, and executed both father and son in a manner that violated every Westerosi law. Lord Rickard was dressed in his full armor when the Mad King suspended him from the rafters and lit a massive fire beneath him. His armor turned into a furnace, burning him alive. Meanwhile, Rickard's son, Brandon, was fitted with a Tyroshi noose that tightened with every moment. So every time he tried to reach out and save his father, the noose strangled him until it choked him fully. But Aerys wasn't satisfied with these 2 deaths. He also wanted Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon's heads. So Catelyn wasn't wrong when she told Jaime Lannister. Aerys was mad. The whole realm knew it.
He loved to watch people burn, with their skin blackened and blistered and melted off their bones. He burned lords he didn't like. He burned
hands disobeyed him, he burned anyone who was against him.
That was the turning point for Aerys' rule, because Jon Arryn refused the king's orders and raised his banners in rebellion. The war quickly spread across the realm, with all the great houses choosing sides. House Stark, House Baratheon, and House Arryn led the rebellion that became known as Robert's Rebellion. House Tyrell and House Martell remained loyal to the crown, while House Lannister waited on the sidelines. Eventually, Robert Baratheon declared his own claim to the Iron Throne, backed by his Targaryen blood through his grandmother, and the two sides clashed in one decisive battle, the Battle of the Trident, where Robert personally killed Rhaegar, shattering the royal cause. When King Aerys lost Rhaegar, he quickly sent his remaining son, Viserys, along with his pregnant queen, Rhaela Targaryen, to Dragonstone. Then, in a final twist, Tywin Lannister appeared at the gates of King's Landing, pretending to support the crown. But as soon as the gates opened for him, Tywin's forces sacked King's Landing, killing Elia Martell and her children. King Aerys had predicted the rebellion might not end in his favour, so he had hid thousands of jars of highly volatile wildfire in strategic locations throughout the city before Tywin showed up. He was willing to burn the entirety of King's Landing so his enemies wouldn't get to kill him themselves. Let him be king over charred bones and cooked meat. Let him be the king of ashes. At the last moment, Jaime Lannister, who was supposed to protect the king, turned on Aerys II and killed him, saving thousands of lives, but earning the name Kingslayer forever.
When I heard they had killed my brother's son, and his poor son, and the children, even the little children.
After the king fell, Robert Baratheon took the throne, ending nearly 3 centuries of Targaryen rule. After the Mad King and Rhaegar died, the Queen Rhaela crowned her young son Viserys as king on Dragonstone. Unfortunately, she too died giving birth to their last daughter, Daenerys Targaryen. Since enemies were closing in from all sides, the last surviving Targaryens, Viserys and Daenerys, were smuggled across the sea to safety, where they would spend years wandering from city to city, clinging to their name and legacy. Viserys Targaryen III. After the fall of the Targaryen dynasty, Viserys III Targaryen, the Mad King's only surviving son, suddenly carried the weight of that lost kingdom on his shoulders. He was just a child when everything collapsed around him, but Viserys had been raised to believe that the Iron Throne still belonged to him. All he needed to do was gain enough power to claim it. But other than that dream, Viserys had nothing. No kingdom, no allies, and certainly no army. Viserys and Daenerys initially found shelter in the free city of Braavos, but once their protector died, the two drifted from one city to another, living off charity. Slowly, everything they carried from Westeros began to disappear, and instead of living like royalty, the two had to live in hardship and humiliation. Eventually, they came to Illyrio Mopatis, a powerful magister in Pentos who housed the two. He even arranged a marriage alliance between the Dothraki warlord, Khal Drogo, and Daenerys, on the promise that the Khal would provide the army Viserys needed to take back the Iron Throne.
With Khal Drogo's army, I would let his whole tribe, all 40,000 men and their horses too, if that's what it took.
However, Daenerys' marriage to Khal Drogo gave her more influence and power than Viserys, and that frustrated him. And one day, that tension reached its breaking point during a confrontation with Khal Drogo. Viserys demanded the crown he was promised, and Drogo gave him one that just so happened to be made from molten gold, which killed him instantly. Daenerys Targaryen, first of her name. The only Targaryen left now was Daenerys, who had always lived in her brother's shadow. So when she was married off to Khal Drogo, it seemed that her owner had changed, but not her status. But Drogo was nothing like Viserys. He loved Daenerys and respected her opinions, and as time passed, she began to transform into a powerful girl who was not afraid to speak her mind. Even when Drogo killed Viserys, Daenerys didn't break. Instead, she grew stronger. But everything changed when Drogo died suddenly, leaving Daenerys alone in a foreign land among the Dothraki. However, Daenerys made a bold decision to walk into Drogo's funeral pyre with 3 dragon eggs. And when the flames died down, she walked out with 3 live dragons, something all those Targaryens before her who had tried and failed to resurrect dragons could never have accomplished.
Blood of my blood.
For the first time in over a century, the world saw dragons again, and with them, the return of true Targaryen power. From that point on, Daenerys was no longer just a lost princess. She was a Targaryen queen, seeking the Iron Throne. But she wanted to earn her title through loyalty, not conquest. So she traveled across Essos, freeing slaves in cities like Astapor and Meereen. Daenerys is our hope. Tell them that at the Citadel. Make them listen. She slowly gained a powerful army, consisting of the Unsullied and the Dothraki, and finally crossed the narrowed sea with a fleet of ships, dragons, powerful men, and a belief that she was destined to rule. She landed at Dragonstone, the ancestral seat of House Targaryen, and from there, she began planning her conquest. If Daenerys had been weak, she would have perished with Viserys. I know she is fierce. Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen are proof enough of that. But Daenerys found herself drawn into a completely different war before she could reach King's Landing. What she didn't know was that fighting against the undead was her ultimate destiny.
When this great winter comes, Rhaenyra, all of Westeros must stand against it. And if the world of men is to survive, a Targaryen must be seated on the Iron Throne.
Daenerys fought the White Walkers with the Wildlings and Northerners, but most importantly, she fought it belied Jon Snow, a man she had grown to love. But during that same war, Daenerys discovered a secret that threatened her entire existence, the fundament of who she was as a person. She found out that Jon was actually Aegon Targaryen, the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, which meant Jon had a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than she did. This revelation, combined with the losses of her dragon Rhaegal and her closest allies, pushed her towards a dangerous precipice. By the time she reached King's Landing for the final battle, Daenerys was no longer the same person who had once dreamed of breaking chains and saving the common people. Because even after the city surrendered, Daenerys chose to burn it, killing thousands of innocent people. Daenerys finally took the Iron Throne and claimed her birthright, but by then, she had lost everything that once made her different. And when Jon realized what Daenerys had become, he made the heartbreaking decision to kill her and save the realm.
You are my queen. Now and always.
Daenerys was the last Targaryen to sit on the Iron Throne, even if it was extremely short-lived. And although Jon was a true-born Targaryen, he denounced his claim and returned to Castle Black, leaving the Seven Kingdoms to a new king who was selected by the great lords of Westeros, Bran Stark. A question for you before you go. Who is your favourite Targaryen ruler? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to check out this video right here on the left before you get out of here, because I promise you, it'll be worth a watch. Until the next time, see you around.